I created a couple of videos where I launch EC2 instances and run a web server on them. You'll find links to those videos attached to this video. In all those videos, I used a demo web server which actually wrote data to a data storage.json file, which was placed in a /demo/data folder. So I did not use a database here, but instead a simple file to store data. Even though that might not be super realistic for a real website, you could absolutely have some processes, maybe even a website that does need to write and read data to and from a file. That's why I chose this simple example here. I will also have a separate video where we do use a database instead. So we have that file here. Now, one problem which we have with this current solution is that whenever an instance is shut down, the data is lost, because that file is stored on a hard drive that's essentially attached to that instance. It uses a EBS volume under the hood, but that volume is erased every time an instance is shut down, hence the data is lost. It would of course be quite interesting to persist that data, so to not delete it, and that's what we'll do in this video. Now, as always in all these videos, if you're new to AWS or EC2 or the EBS service, which we'll use in this video, then you might want to check out my AWS Cloud Practitioner course, where I teach AWS and all the core services from the ground up, and where I even help you pass that entry-level Cloud Practitioner certification in case you're interested in that. So in this video, we'll make sure that this file ends up on a separate hard drive created with help of the EBS service, which is then used by the EC2 instance and which can be used by other EC2 instances which we might start in the future as well. In order to do that, I'm back here in my AWS account and I'll launch a new instance. And this new instance here will use the default AMI or a default AMI based on Amazon Linux. So no custom AMI, even though I have a video where I show how you could create one, but here I'll use a default one. I'll choose T2 Micro to make sure that we're in the free tier. Choose no key pair because I won't connect with a local SSH client. Instead, I will connect here with help of SSH, with help of EC2 Instance Connect. Hence, I'll choose a security group that actually allows both HTTP and SSH traffic. HTTP because we'll run a website, and SSH because I do want to connect to that instance. Hence, that's the security group I chose. You could, of course, also create a new one. And I will keep the storage settings here. We could tweak them, but I will do it outside of the launch wizard to show you how you can create and use a EBS volume, which is that hard drive which I want to attach to the instance after launching the instance. Now, under advanced details, there is something I want to do. I want to paste in this user data script here, which I also showed you in another video already, where I introduced you to user data and to the idea behind this concept, because this script will perform all the steps on this brand new instance to install all the software we need, download the website code, install all the dependencies, create that file and folder, and start that web server. So I'll paste this in here. You find that user data script attached, and then we can launch this instance. And thus far, that's nothing new. I'll now just wait for this instance to launch and then a couple of minutes to make sure that everything was set up and installed. And thereafter, we'll proceed with adding that extra volume, which then will not be erased when the instance should be terminated. So now here my instance started up. We can quickly check whether the website is reachable, and it is. And we can share an example statement here, like a test by me. And this data will be saved in that file. Now, if I would terminate that instance and then restart it with the same user data script, that data would be lost, and if I would reload the website thereafter, the data would not be there. Here it is, because I did not terminate the instance, but it would be lost if I terminated it and restarted it with the same user data script, because right now, that file in which the data is stored is written to the hard drive that's attached to this instance, and since that is the root volume attached to the instance, it is erased and deleted together with the instance. But it doesn't have to be that way. What we can do is we can go to the Elastic Block Store section, here still on the EC2 service page, and then to volumes there. Now there we see one volume, and that is the root volume I just mentioned. So this is attached to this one instance that's up and running. That's this one volume you always saw in the launch wizard when you created a new EC2 instance. And that volume contains our data. It also contains the operating system and all the other software that was installed, but it would be deleted together with the instance when we shut it down. What we can do is we can create a new volume, a new hard drive, so to say, a virtual hard drive, because that's what the EBS service allows us to do. It allows us to create block store volumes, which are essentially unformatted raw hard drives. And we can attach those hard drives to our instances to then format and mount them from inside our instances. Now, when you create a new volume, you can choose which kind of volume it should be. We have SSD volumes here, different kinds of SSD volumes, which are optimized for different data access patterns. We have a non-SSD volume, a hard drive here, which could be used for huge amounts of throughput. So where read and write speed doesn't matter too much, but you need to store large chunks of data. But here I'll stick to the default that was selected, because that is also free tier eligible as long as we don't make this hard drive too big at least. Hence here I'll choose 2 GB of space. I don't want a large hard drive, I only need a small one to show you what I want to show you. And I'll keep all the other defaults here, except for one thing, the availability zone. When it comes to that, we should check in which availability zone our instance was started. And for this, we can select our instance and go to networking. And then there we see the availability zone where this instance was launched into. The availability zone was chosen automatically. We could have chosen one manually when we launched an instance, but since we didn't make a setting there, any availability zone was picked. So here it's 1B for me. Hence, I'll make sure that my hard drive is created in the same availability zone. Because you can only attach volumes to instances if they are in the same availability zone. Now, if we had a volume in the past and we created a snapshot based on it, which is something you can do with EBS to store the data that's on a hard drive, we could restore this volume from that snapshot to use that data which we saved in the past to initialize this hard drive. Here I don't have a snapshot which I want to use though, hence I won't choose this option. Now we could encrypt the volume to make sure that the data is encrypted, and that is something you generally might want to do. I do talk more about encryption in my full course. Here I'll not select it though, and instead I'll create this volume like this. Now with that volume is now being created, and as soon as it is created, we can attach it to this EC2 instance and then format it from inside that instance to make it usable, and then mount it to that instance so that we're able to read and write data to and from it. So hence I'll wait for this creation to finish. And once it's finished, it is available, not in use yet because we're not using it with any instance yet. But now that it's available, we can attach it by selecting it and choosing attach volume, and then we can choose the instance to which it should be attached. You can then choose a device name, and here you should keep the default typically. So now we can attach it. There also are some types of volumes and some types of instances which can be attached to multiple instances simultaneously, but that's a more advanced topic and not the case for all volumes and all instance types. So now this is attached. On this instance, we can now use this volume. out of the box, it's attached, but it's not usable yet. Therefore, we have to make it usable, and we do that by connecting to this instance with SSH, either with a local client if you have a key pair, or with EC2 Instance Connect. And that's what I'll do here. I'll connect to this instance, and that then allows me to make this volume usable. Now, making those EBS volumes usable and mounting them to the instance so that data can be written to them is such a common task that there is an official guide for that. You'll find a link to that guide attached. It's an official documentation page which explains how you can make a EBS volume usable. And we'll now essentially go through the steps described in that guide. And the first step is to make sure that we can see this new volume that was attached. For this, you can run the lsblk command, which is just a default Linux command to list all the devices, all the hard drives that are available, essentially. And here you can see this hard drive. That's the one we created. You can tell by the size here because that's the 2 GB hard drive we created. This here, on the other hand, is the root volume, which was created together with the instance. So it was attached successfully. It's an unformatted raw hard drive though, therefore as a first step we have to format it. A good idea is to first of all run the sudo file-s command and then target this hard drive here with /dev/that identifier here, which is xvdf, to see whether it maybe is formatted already. If you get data as a response here though, that means that it's not formatted yet and that you have to format it. This also is another default Linux command which allows us to inspect a connected hard drive and find out whether it is formatted yet or not. /dev is a prefix you have to add here. That's something you just have to know and something that is mentioned in that official guide I showed you a couple of seconds ago. By the way, as a side note, you don't need to know Linux or these commands to pass any AWS exams. I'm just showing this to you so that you see EBS and EC2 in action, not because you would need this detailed Linux knowledge for the AWS certification exams. You don't need that kind of knowledge for those exams. There, you just need to know how EBS and EC2 and so on generally work. Okay, so this is an unformatted hard drive. So to format it and make it usable, we should run the mkfs, the make file system command, and use the xfs file system and target this unformatted hard drive device. With this Linux command, we format that hard drive. And now, therefore, if we repeat the command from before, we now see that a file system exists on that hard drive. So now we did format that unformatted volume. As a last step, we now need to mount that volume, which basically means we must tell the operating system for which folder on the system this hard drive should be used. So which path on the operating system should map to this hard drive. And you do this with help of the mount command. And here I want to use a folder that should exist already. I want to use the /demo folder. That folder, if we navigate into it, is the folder that has the data directory, which contains the data storage.json file. Hence, I want to mount that demo folder and outsource it onto this new volume, so to say. For this, we run sudo mount and then choose this external device, this volume with its identifier, which we used before as well, and then point at /demo. Now, after mounting this new formatted volume to this instance here and to the operating system, if we navigate into this demo folder, we see that the data folder now is gone. Hence, we should quickly recreate this data folder here and then navigate into that data folder and also make sure we recreate this data storage.json file. Now we only need to do this here only once because we did format and attach this hard drive for the first time. If we start other instances in the future and we use this existing volume, which now is already formatted, we won't lose our data again. But since we did now mount an empty, newly formatted volume, we lost our data that was in the /demo/data folder before. Hence here, I want to recreate this with the appropriate permissions. And now that the data storage JSON file exists again, this time this file will be stored on that volume, on that extra EBS volume, because it is stored in that folder, which we used as a mount point for this new volume. Hence now, if we reload this website, our data is lost. But if I recreate some data here, it's of course stored, but the interesting part is that if I now go back and I terminate this instance, this time the data will not be lost after terminating the instance. And before, without using any extra volumes, that would have been the case. But now here, with that extra volume that we used, you see that as this instance is shutting down, if you visit your volumes, this volume is still there. And that is the volume we created before. It's not the root volume, which, as I mentioned, is erased together with the instance, but it's that separate volume we created. And now that volume is still formatted and has still all the data that we wrote to it. Therefore, if we launch a new instance now, and we keep the default Amazon Linux base AMI, we keep T2 Micro, I don't need a key pair, and we choose a security group that gives us SSH and HTTP access, because I still want to be able to connect via SSH, because we will still need to mount the volume. We just don't need to format it anymore, as you will see. But if we choose all these things, we will be able to re-add that volume which we created before. Now there's one important thing we have to do though. Under network settings, if we edit those, you have to make sure that you choose a subnet that's in the same availability zone as the EBS volume you created before. So for me, that's this 1B availability zone. Because as mentioned before, your volume and your instance must be in the same availability zone. So with that chosen, with that security group chosen, we don't need to change anything here for the storage, but under advanced details, I will again execute some user data, and I will keep the part where I create that folder and file here so that the web server launches successfully. But after this instance started, we will again connect to it via SSH, via EC2 Instance Connect, for example, to then again mount that EBS volume to that instance. And we could definitely build a setup where such things are done automatically, but here I want to do it manually to keep things rather simple and straightforward. And therefore we'll wait for this instance to start running. And once it is up and running, we can go back to volumes and choose our 2 GB volume. So not the other one, which is the root volume of the new instance, but our custom volume instead. And attach it to this newly started instance. Because you always have to do that. You always must attach a volume to an instance. It's not attached automatically. Instead, you have to attach it manually like this. Again, there would be ways of automating this, but here we'll keep it simple. So we attach this volume. The important difference compared to before is that now the volume is already formatted though, because we did that earlier. And with that volume attached to the newly started instance, we just have to connect to that instance, for example through EC2 Instance Connect, and then again mount the volume. One important thing we don't have to do though is formatting the volume. That's not something we have to do and not something we should do, because we would erase our data if we did so. Instead, the volume which we did attach is already formatted, and therefore we just have to mount it. Now we could again go through all the commands we ran before for listing all the available volumes. Here I'll instead jump right ahead and run sudo mount, target the extra volume which is available here, and mount it to the /demo folder. If you do this and you navigate into that folder, you see that here we have all the data from before. If I print the content of data storage.json, you also see the data that was written by the website before. So that proves that the data is still there because it was on that volume all the time, and that volume was never erased, even though that's a new instance. So therefore now, with all of that out of the way, if we again grab this public DNS address and we load this website again, what you will see here is that the data is still there. This test entry, which I made before, is still there because now we saved it on that extra volume. And that's how you could persist data on your EC2 instances, or to be precise, not on them, but when using EC2 instances with help of the extra EBS service and those EBS volumes, which are simply hard drive volumes, raw and unformatted hard drive volumes initially, which you can attach to your instances, format and mount, and save any data you want on them, and then use them on other instances in the future to make sure that the data is not lost. This would therefore, for example, be perfect if you would have an EC2 instance where you run a database server to store the data that's written by the database to the file system such that it's not erased when the instance is shut down. Here in this video, I showed you how to get started with EBS with this basic, simple example website instead. Now, don't forget to again terminate and delete all the resources created as part of this tutorial to make sure that you're not accidentally paying for them in the future. When it comes to deleting the volume, you first of all have to detach it from the instance and then wait until it's detached so that you can delete the volume thereafter.